March 6, 1945, 3:47 p.m., Cologne Cathedral Square, Germany. The gunner's periscope splintered into a spiderweb of cracks as Feldwebel Karl Hoffmann pressed his eye against the optics. He strained to make sense of the unfamiliar silhouette creeping out of the rubble-strewn street. For 3 years, he had studied every American tank profile by heart. The high-sitting Sherman with its underpowered 75mm gun. The Stuart light tank, a toy in the eyes of Tiger crews. Even the rare Sherman Jumbo, whose extra armor still couldn't resist a Tiger's front plate at 500 meters. But this was something else. Das ist kein Sherman, he whispered into the intercom, his voice trembling in a way his crew had never heard before. That's not a Sherman. Through the fractured glass, he could see it more clearly now. The gun barrel, longer, thicker than anything mounted on American armor before. The hull sat lower, angled, with sloped armor that looked cast rather than welded. The turret loomed massive, oversized for the chassis, like someone had mounted an anti-aircraft gun atop a tank. His mind scrambled through recognition charts, intelligence briefings, every silhouette he had memorized. Nothing matched. In 18 seconds, Karl Hoffmann and his crew would be among the first German tankers in history to learn that the Americans had finally built something capable of killing them, at any range, from any angle. Earlier that day, the Panther commanded by Oberleutnant Wilhelm Bartelborth of Panzer, Brigade 106, had already discovered this truth. 3 minutes before Hoffmann's moment of dread, his 5-man crew had been obliterated. The newcomer, the M26 Pershing, spoke first with its 90mm M3 gun. Its armor-piercing rounds screamed across the 120 meters between them at 853 meters per second, striking the Panther's turret face. For 2 years, that 100mm plate had deflected Sherman rounds with ease in France and Belgium. But this time it cracked. The 90mm shell tore through the crew compartment before detonating, leaving nothing but burning steel and silence. The era of invincibility. For nearly 3 years, German heavy tank crews had fought inside machines that seemed untouchable. Since the first Tiger I had thundered into action outside Leningrad in 1942, its legend had grown. The 88mm KWK-36 gun capable of annihilating Allied tanks at ranges over 2,000 meters. Frontal armor so thick that Shermans could only penetrate it under perfect conditions at less than 100 meters. The psychological weight of that invulnerability. Tiger crews fought with the certainty of superiority. The mathematics were stark. The Sherman's 75mm M3 gun was nearly useless against the Tiger, while the German 88mm turned Allied armor into targets on firing range. This imbalance forged doctrine. By late 1944, German tank units deployed their Tigers and King Tigers at maximum distance, striking Allied columns before they could fire back. A single Tiger often stalled entire offensives. The most famous case came in June 1944 when SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann's Tiger destroyed 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 13 other vehicles in under 15 minutes. Though Wittmann would die later that summer, his legend only reinforced the aura of German armor dominance. But far away, in Detroit and Michigan's Grand Blanc Arsenal, engineers had been quietly working since 1942 on something designed to end that dominance. The project was known only as T-26. The Americans were building a tank that would shatter the myth of German invulnerability. Detroit, Michigan, September 1942. The bitter truth had become undeniable. American tank design was falling dangerously behind. The M4 Sherman, backbone of U.S. armor divisions, had been conceived in 1941 when most dangerous German tank was the Panzer IV with its short-barreled 75mm gun. By the time Shermans rolled into Italy and Normandy, they were hopelessly outclassed by Tigers and Panthers in every measure that mattered. Firepower, armor, effective range. For American crews, the battlefield math was brutal. Shermans burned under German 88mm fire long before they could close to a range where their own rounds had even a chance of penetration. Something had to change. The T-26 program. The answer began under a code name, Project T-26. It was a crash program, unlike anything the Ordnance Department had attempted before. 14 major contractors, over 300 subcontractors, and more than 50,000 workers across 22 states were mobilized. The Fisher Body Division of General Motors, already producing Sherman tanks at the Grand Blanc Arsenal, was ordered to retool immediately for a new kind of machine. The changes were staggering. new casting techniques to create massive one-piece turrets, an entirely new transmission system. Most crucially, the adaptation of the 90mm M3 gun, a weapon originally designed for tank destroyers and anti-aircraft units. The gun that changed everything. The 90mm M3 gun was a marvel of American engineering. Developed from a proven 90mm anti-aircraft weapon, it fired a 24-pound armor-piercing shell at speeds over 2,800 feet per second. The M82 APC round could pierce 119mm of armor at 500 yards, enough to crack a Tiger's front plate at normal combat distances. The T-30E16 HVAP round with a tungsten carbide core could punch through 221mm of armor, more than enough to threaten even the mighty King Tiger. For the first time, American crews would have a weapon that could look German tanks in the eye and strike first. Secrecy and deception. The development program was cloaked in secrecy. At Fisher Tank Arsenal, workers were told they were building an improved Sherman variant. Components were produced at separate facilities to keep anyone from piecing the design together. When the first 20 Pershings were ready for shipment to Europe in January 1945, they weren't labeled as tanks at all. They were listed as heavy maintenance equipment, wrapped in tarps, and shipped under false codes. The crews selected to operate them had been training in isolation at Fort Knox since November 1944. They were sworn to secrecy under penalty of court-martial, learning cover stories to pose as ordinary Sherman replacements. On January 15, 1945, under cover of darkness, the first Pershings were loaded aboard transport ships in New York Harbor. The voyage across U-boat-infested waters took 11 tense days. The tanks were hidden deep in the holds, behind rows of ordinary Shermans, unseen by most of the crew. Arrival in Europe. On January 26, 1945, the Pershings arrived at the port of Antwerp. Again, they were unloaded at night and shuttled by special train to the 3rd Armored Division's maintenance area near Düren, Germany. Here, under the direct supervision of Major General Maurice Rose, the crews prepared their machines for combat. Rose personally briefed battalion commanders on the new weapon, and the secrecy orders surrounded. By February 25, 1945, the Pershings were distributed across the 3rd Armored Division as it prepared to push toward the Rhine. Each was assigned one per task force, deliberately blended among regular Shermans. Their crews were instructed: do not reveal the tank unless necessary. Do not engage unless it is a German heavy tank. To camouflage them, Pershings were painted standard olive drab with Sherman-style markings. Still, to the trained eye, their lower hulls and long 90mm barrels gave them away. But the deception worked. German intelligence, normally among the sharpest of the war, never suspected their existence. The Wehrmacht remained convinced that the Americans had chosen quantity over quality, unable to imagine that American industry could simultaneously mass-produce Shermans and pivot to heavy tanks. The German intelligence failure was complete. February 26, 1945, near Elsdorf, Germany. The secrecy surrounding the Pershing could not prevent the inevitable. Within 24 hours of being deployed, the Americans suffered their first combat loss. The tank was nicknamed Fireball. It belonged to Company F, 33rd Armor Regiment, 3rd Armored Division. That morning, as the tank advanced through narrow German streets, a Tiger I lay in ambush. At close range, barely 100 yards, the German gunner fired. The 88mm round slammed into the Pershing's gun mantlet. The result was devastating. The gunner and loader were killed instantly, the commander wounded. Smoke and sparks filled the crew compartment. Fireball's main gun sagged uselessly. For a moment, it seemed as if the legend of German superiority would hold. But the truth was more complex. Fireball was not destroyed beyond repair. Within days, U.S. recovery crews had hauled the damaged Pershing back to workshops. By March 7th, it was back in service, a testament to American maintenance and logistics power, an advantage Germany could no longer match. Rumors in the ranks. Even as Fireball was being repaired, reports began to circulate among German crews. Something strange was happening at the front. A Panther platoon reported being destroyed at 1,800 meters by an American tank they could not identify. Survivors described gun that seemed far too long to belong to a Sherman. Other reports spoke of unusually heavy frontal armor on American machines. Most chilling of all, every description included the same detail, a barrel much larger than 75 millimeters. German intelligence officers tried to dismiss these reports as misidentifications. After all, Tiger fever had haunted Allied troops for years, causing them to mistake any German tank for a Tiger. Could their own crews now be succumbing to a similar illusion? But the pattern was undeniable. Something new had arrived on the battlefield. March 6, 1945, Cologne Cathedral Square. It was here, in the shadow of Cologne's great cathedral, that the Pershing would prove itself before the eyes of the world. Cameraman Jim Bates of the U.S. Army Signal Corps happened to be filming as American armor advanced into the square. His footage would later become one of the most famous pieces of war film ever shot. Oberleutnant Wilhelm Bartelborth, commanding a Panther from Panzer Brigade 106, spotted what he believed to be a modified Sherman emerging from behind the ruins of the Gerien Hotel. Its gun looked longer than usual, but at 300 meters, he considered it an easy kill. The Panther fired first. The high-velocity 75mm round struck the Pershing's front plate at point-blank range. Sparks flew. The round ricocheted harmlessly. Bartelborth had 3 seconds to process the impossibility. Then the Pershing's 90mm spoke. Inside Eagle 7, Staff Sergeant Robert Earley gave the order to fire. Corporal Clarence Smoyer, the gunner, aligned the crosshairs on the Panther's mantlet and squeezed the trigger. The 90mm armor-piercing round tore through the German tank's frontal turret. Flames engulfed the crew compartment. Ammunition cooked off. The Panther burned. Another German tank nearby attempted to engage. Accounts vary whether it was a second Panther or a Tiger, but within minutes, it too was destroyed by the Pershing. The duel lasted less than 5 minutes. Bates' camera captured every moment. For the first time, the myth of German armored invincibility had been broken, on film, in front of both armies. The shockwave. In the days following Cologne, panic rippled through the Wehrmacht. German High Command issued urgent directives: report immediately any encounters with unidentified American heavy tanks. What came back painted a picture of technological shock. Tanks destroyed at ranges beyond 1,500 meters. Frontal armor penetrated where it should have been invulnerable. Crews describing a Sherman-like silhouette, but with a far longer gun. Unable to accept the possibility of an entirely new tank, many German crews began referring to it as the long-gun Sherman. This misunderstanding persisted for weeks, leading to fatal tactical errors as they tried to fight Pershings with anti-Sherman doctrine. March 1945, the Western Front. For years, German heavy tank crews had fought with the certainty of superiority. Inside Tigers and Panthers, they felt untouchable. Their doctrine reflected this. Position tanks at maximum range. Strike Shermans before they could even respond. Trust in armor and optics to make every engagement an uneven duel. It had worked. From Normandy to the Ardennes, single Tigers had stalled entire Allied columns. Crews painted kill rings on their gun barrels like fighter aces. To be a Tiger commander was to embody invincibility. But by spring 1945, that aura was cracking. The Pershing rumor. Reports of the long-gun Sherman spread through German ranks like wildfire. Crews whispered about American tanks with 90mm class guns destroying Panthers and Tigers from distances once thought safe. The problem wasn't just combat, it was uncertainty. Through a gunner's periscope, it was nearly impossible to distinguish a Pershing from a Sherman at long range. Every encounter became a gamble. Was that another easy Sherman kill? Or was it one of the new heavy tanks capable of striking back with lethal force? For crews who had once hunted Shermans with contempt, hesitation crept in. Seconds lost in doubt often proved fatal. Morale erosion. By mid-March, American intelligence noted a disturbing trend. German tank abandonment rates were spiking. Panthers were left behind with thrown tracks or minor engine problems, faults that crews would have repaired weeks earlier. Recovery vehicles reported finding tanks abandoned with full fuel tanks and only superficial damage. Crews increasingly declared their machines irreparable under fire, choosing survival over a fight. The fear of Pershings was working as effectively as the tanks themselves. From hunters to the hunted, this reversal was dramatic. For nearly 3 years, Tiger crews had hunted Shermans with calm efficiency. Now they found themselves hunted by an enemy tank they couldn't fully identify or understand. The psychological shift was visible on the battlefield. Defensive positions collapsed faster than expected. Offensive operations stalled as tank units hesitated to press attacks without guarantees of Pershing absence. Rumors alone could force withdrawals. A single Pershing in a sector could paralyze entire German battalions. The bridgeheads of the Rhine. In late March 1945, as American forces drove toward the Rhine, German tank crews faced impossible orders: hold bridgeheads against the advancing Americans. But the certainty of superiority was gone. Every silhouette in the distance carried the possibility of being a Pershing. Every decision was haunted by doubt. The result was predictable. Positions that should have held for days collapsed within hours. The psychological collapse. By April, the Panzerwaffe was no longer the fearsome armored fist of 1940. It had become brittle. Crews that had once sworn to fight to the last bolt were now surrendering faster than infantry. Entire armored units avoided combat rather than risk confronting an enemy that might or might not have Pershings. The impact of only 20 Pershings in combat was disproportionate to their numbers. They had struck at something far more important than armor thickness or gun caliber, the belief system that had carried German tankers through years of retreat and defeat. Fort Knox, Kentucky, November 1944. Before the Pershings ever crossed the Atlantic, a select group of American tank crews trained in isolation. Chosen from experienced Sherman veterans, they were sworn to secrecy under penalty of court-martial. Their cover story: they were replacement crews for standard M4s. Behind the fences of Fort Knox, though, they learned something different. They were being entrusted with a machine unlike any other in the American arsenal. First impressions. Crews who climbed into the M26 Pershing noticed the differences immediately. Space. Compared to the cramped, rattling Sherman, the Pershing felt roomy, even comfortable. Stability. Its 90mm gun had a stabilization system, allowing accurate fire even while on the move, something no Tiger could do. Turret traverse. Power-assisted rotation gave them a full 360 degrees sweep in 15 seconds. German tanks, by contrast, often relied on hand cranks when engines weren't running. Protection. Sloped frontal armor meant crews no longer felt like tinder inside a gasoline-fueled coffin. Small details impressed them too: padded surfaces, interior lighting, even better ergonomics. American engineers had thought not just about killing, but about keeping crews alive. Confidence grows. For years, American tankers had faced a grim reality. In a Sherman against a Tiger, survival often meant relying on numbers, flanking maneuvers, and luck. The Pershing changed the mental equation. Now, they had a weapon that could meet German armor head-on. Crews began to train with new tactics. Long-range dueling, once unthinkable, was suddenly possible. Urban combat, where Shermans were death traps, now offered better odds with thicker armor and a heavier gun. Combined arms cooperation was enhanced by one subtle innovation: a telephone on the rear hull, allowing infantry to speak directly with tank crews, something German designs lacked entirely. For the first time, American crews felt like equals in the duel. Arrival in Europe, January 1945. The secrecy continued. When the first 20 Pershings arrived in Antwerp, their crews slipped into regular Sherman units. The order from above was strict: do not reveal the new tanks unless absolutely necessary. Some crews felt frustration. They had spent months training with a machine built to kill Tigers, only to be told to hold back. But patience would prove short-lived. Within weeks, as battles for the Rhine escalated, the Pershings were finally unleashed. Into battle. Accounts from Pershing crews reveal a mixture of excitement and dread. They were pioneers, testing a weapon no one had fought with before. Staff Sergeant Robert Earley's Eagle 7 would become immortalized at Cologne Cathedral. Other crews recorded their first kills against Panthers and fortified positions, realizing with grim satisfaction that their gun could finally punch through German armor frontally. In quieter moments, they acknowledged flaws: transmissions that overheated, breakdowns on long marches, a slower rate of fire than German 88mm guns. Still, every man who crewed a Pershing understood they were driving a machine that symbolized something larger. It wasn't just about surviving another battle. It was about proving American industry had caught up and perhaps surpassed the Germans. The psychological turn. For American tankers, the Pershing was more than a weapon. It was redemption. Years of watching friends burn in Shermans, of outgunned duels against Tigers, of being told to rely on numbers and sacrifice. Those years ended the moment the 90mm gun roared. They no longer fought just to endure. They fought with the knowledge that, at last, they could strike fear into the enemy. April 1945, the Western Front. The Pershing had arrived too late to reshape the war in a material sense. Only about 20 tanks were in actual combat by March. Yet their presence struck the German Panzerwaffe at its core. The myth of superiority, the belief that German steel was always stronger, thicker, deadlier, was shattered. Abandonment and retreat. Reports from American intelligence painted a consistent picture. German tank crews were abandoning vehicles with minor breakdowns. Panthers and even King Tigers were left behind for thrown tracks, empty fuel tanks, or minor engine problems that would once have been repaired under fire. Crews claimed their tanks were irreparable, but in truth they no longer trusted that repairs were worth the risk of meeting Pershings. By late March, tank recovery units routinely found fully fueled vehicles with intact main guns, abandoned not to logistics but to fear. The Rhine and beyond. As American forces surged toward the Rhine, German armored doctrine unraveled. Orders to hold bridgeheads collapsed into hesitation. Commanders no longer trusted their own assumptions. Every approaching silhouette might be a Pershing. Every engagement was a gamble. In sectors where Pershings were rumored to be present, entire battalions withdrew without firing a shot. Positions designed to withstand days of siege crumbled in hours. The Battle of Dessau, April 21st to 24th, 1945. The city of Dessau offered one final example of the new reality. German defenders still had operational Panthers and even a handful of Tigers. On paper, they could resist. But when American forces attacked, with Pershings scattered among Shermans, the defense collapsed almost immediately. Crews hesitated, refused to engage at long range, and often chose to withdraw rather than face a possible duel with the new tanks. The battle that should have been bloody turned into a rout. The fear factor. By now, American officers noted something striking. German tank crews were surrendering faster than their infantry counterparts. Once among the most feared and determined soldiers on the battlefield, panzer crews increasingly gave themselves up at the first sign of being outmatched. It was a complete reversal. For years, American tankers had been haunted by the specter of the Tiger. Now, German crews lived in dread of the long gun on the Pershing. The King Tigers fall from grace. Perhaps the most telling change came in the fate of the Königstiger, Tiger II. Weighing 68 tons with 150 millimeters of frontal armor, it had been the pride of German armored engineering. No Sherman could touch it from the front. Yet in April 1945, even King Tiger crews grew, reluctant to fight. Yes, their guns still outclassed the Pershing in some respects. Yes, their armor could resist most 90 millimeters rounds. But the psychological balance had shifted. Crews no longer fought with the certainty of superiority. They hesitated, doubted, second-guessed. And in tank warfare, hesitation was death. The true victory. By the end of April, the Pershing's presence had accomplished what thousands of Shermans never could. It broke the German confidence. It turned hunters into hunted. It transformed the Panzerwaffe from an elite armored fist into a fractured force, unsure of its machines, its doctrine, and its future. The numbers remained small. Barely 310 Pershings reached Europe before Germany surrendered, with only a fraction ever firing in anger. But their psychological impact was enormous. The war in the West was ending, and German tankers knew it. May 1945, Germany's collapse. As the Western Front dissolved in the final weeks of April and early May, thousands of German tank crewmen surrendered. Many went into captivity before their supporting infantry, a reversal of the old pattern where panzermen fought to the last shell. When questioned by U.S. Army intelligence officers, their testimonies carried a haunting consistency. We knew the war was lost when the Americans brought heavy tanks. Interrogations, breaking the myth. For 3 years, German crews had survived defeat after defeat with one sustaining belief, that their tanks, Panthers, Tigers, and finally King Tigers, were technically superior to anything the Allies could produce. Outnumbered, they trusted their guns to level the odds. Bombed from the air, they moved at night and hid by day. Forced into retreat, they consoled themselves that, in battle, their machines were kings. The arrival of the Pershing shattered this foundation. Veterans described a before and after moment. Before, they fought with confidence, certain their tanks could dominate. After, they fought only to survive, hesitant, second-guessing, unwilling to take risks. Many admitted they had never actually encountered a Pershing in combat. The fear was enough. The uncertainty alone poisoned morale. The engineers' shock. When the Germans finally captured and examined damaged Pershing components, their engineers were stunned. Inside the cast turret and hull, they found design choices that challenged their assumptions about American industry. Casting, a single-piece turret requiring massive foundries Germany never possessed. Engine reliability, the Ford GAF V8 produced 500 horsepower with a smoothness German Maybach engines could not match. Transmission, advanced but dependable, offering features German tanks lacked. Gun stabilization, allowed accurate fire on the move, something no Tiger could do. Crew comfort, spacious interiors, padded surfaces, lighting, even wet ammunition storage to reduce fire risk. To German eyes, these were luxuries. To the Americans, they were practical survivability features. Together, they revealed not just technical parity, but a philosophy of design that prioritized the crew as much as the machine. The ideological crisis. For Nazi propaganda, the discovery was devastating. Crews who had been told for years that German racial and technical superiority was unassailable now faced a tank built by mongrel democracy that matched, and in some ways surpassed, their best. 4 Waffen-SS tankers, trained to believe they embodied Aryan supremacy, this realization struck like a betrayal of their worldview. If American workers in Detroit could forge a tank equal to the Tiger, what did that say about the very ideology they fought for? It was not just a military defeat. It was an ideological collapse. From strength to surrender. The statistics told their own story. Only 310 Pershings arrived in Europe before V-Day. Of those, fewer than 20 saw combat. Yet the Panzerwaffe's morale collapsed in weeks. Abandonment soared. Reports of Pershing encounters spread faster than the tanks themselves. Entire armored units withdrew from positions at the rumor of Pershings. The hunters had become the hunted, without ever needing to be outnumbered. The irony of parity. In purely technical terms, the M26 Pershing was not invulnerable. Its transmission was prone to breakdowns. Its armor, though sloped, was thinner than that of the King Tiger. Its rate of fire was slower than the German 88mm. On paper, it was roughly equivalent to the Panther, superior in some aspects, inferior in others. But war is not fought on paper. What mattered was belief, and belief had turned. May 1945, victory in Europe. When the guns finally fell silent, the M26 Pershing's role in the war was small in numbers, but vast in consequence. American commanders and German prisoners alike recognized that its presence had altered the psychological balance of the battlefield. But historians, engineers, and officers soon turned to the hard numbers and the lessons they revealed. The production gap. The Pershing story was as much about industry as about technology. By October 1945, the United States had produced 2,212 M26 Pershings. Fisher-Body's Grand Blanc arsenal alone built 1,739 units. Chrysler's Detroit tank arsenal added 473 more. Compare this to Germany's total heavy tank production during the entire war. 1,347 Tiger I tanks. 492 Tiger IIs, King Tigers. Even if every Pershing had been technically equal to a Panther rather than superior, the production mathematics were devastating. America could flood Europe with Pershings while Germany struggled to maintain 100 tanks per month by 1945. What German crews did not fully grasp during the war was that the Pershing they feared was only the beginning. The next wave. American engineers were already moving beyond the M26. Experimental designs were on drawing boards or in prototype form. T-26E for Super Pershing, mounting an even more powerful 90mm gun with 25 units built and 1 seeing combat in Europe. T-26E5, with armor increased to nearly 279mm on the front, 27 prototypes produced. T-29 heavy tank, armed with a massive 105mm gun. T-30 heavy tank, mounting a colossal 155mm gun. Though the war ended before these could be deployed, the trajectory was clear. American tank design was no longer lagging. It was accelerating ahead. Post-war German reflections. In interrogations and later memoirs, German tank veterans consistently marked the Pershing as the moment they knew the war was unwinnable. We could face the Russians. Their tanks we could still destroy. But when the Americans brought heavy tanks, it was over. For veterans who had fought from 1942 onward, the realization was crushing. Their faith in technological superiority had carried them through defeat after defeat. Once that was gone, only survival mattered. The irony was bitter. Many German crews had never actually fought a Pershing, but the fear of fighting one dictated their actions. In warfare, perception often proves as decisive as reality. Doctrine rewritten. The lessons weren't lost on post-war militaries. The Bundeswehr, rebuilt in the 1950s, emphasized never relying solely on technological superiority again. Industrial capacity and logistics had to underpin doctrine. The U.S. Army recognized that it had waited too long to field a heavy tank. The Pershing, while successful, had arrived in the war's final months. In future conflicts, parity would not be enough. Dominance would be required. Thus, the Pershing became a bridge, leading to the development of the M26 Patton and the entire lineage of U.S. Cold War tanks. The symbol of a shift. Today, Pershings stand in museums beside captured Tigers and Panthers. Technically, they were near equals, but the plaques often miss the larger truth. The Tiger symbolized Germany's pursuit of perfection in small numbers. The Pershings symbolized America's ability to achieve enough perfection in massive numbers. The Cold War would be shaped by this lesson, that industrial democracy could match and surpass authoritarian engineering, not always immediately, but inevitably. Post-war Germany, 1950s to 1970s. In the years after surrender, former Panzer crewmen met at reunions, wrote memoirs, and were interviewed by Allied historians. Again and again, a single theme emerged. The Pershing represented the breaking point. They spoke of a shift not just in tactics, but in their very state of mind. The before and after. Veterans described their service in two distinct phases. Before Pershing, confidence, even when outnumbered. They trusted their Tigers and Panthers to dominate Shermans and Cromwells. Even in retreat, they believed technology gave them an edge. After Pershing, doubt, hesitation, and fear. Suddenly, any duel could end with their destruction. For the first time, American tanks were seen as equals, or worse, as predators. One veteran recalled, "It was not the numbers that defeated us. We were used to that. It was the thought that the Americans now had tanks equal to ours. We had always believed their machines were inferior. That belief died with the Pershing." Psychological collapse. Several former commanders admitted that their units often abandoned positions not because of actual Pershings present, but because of rumors. One Panther gunner described the uncertainty. "Through the sight, we could not tell if it was a Sherman or a Pershing. To fire and be wrong was death. So many times we held fire. Many times that was the end." This hesitation, the loss of their hunter's instinct, was more damaging than any shell. The Tiger's shadow. Even the elite Tiger crews, once legends of invincibility, confessed to the creeping dread. A veteran of Schwer Panzerabteilung 506 recalled, "With the Tiger, we always felt safe. Even when many Shermans came, we knew we would destroy them. But when they told us the Americans had a heavy tank, we were no longer sure. The safety was gone." Another, who had fought on the Eastern Front, described the dissonance. "Against the Russians, we were still gods. But in the West, we feared the Americans. That was very difficult for us to accept." Ideological wounds. For some, the shock went deeper than the battlefield. Nazi propaganda had drummed into them that Germany's strength lay in its racial and technological superiority. When they learned that America, industrial, democratic, and dismissed as inferior in Nazi ideology, had built a tank that matched the Tiger, it cut at their very worldview. One Waffen-SS tanker later admitted, "We told ourselves we were chosen, that we had the best. Then we saw what the Americans had made. It was a great humiliation, worse than defeat." A silent memory. By the 1960s and 70s, Pershings stood quietly in American and European museums. German veterans who visited them often lingered in silence. Some touched the armor. Others spoke quietly to their comrades. To Allied eyes, the Pershing was just another tank on display. To those who had faced it or merely feared facing it, it was a symbol of the moment their invincibility died. The end of an era. In memoirs, German tankers rarely exaggerated the Pershing's technical qualities. Many acknowledged its flaws, its breakdowns, its thinner armor compared to the King Tiger. But they always returned to one truth. It was not the tank itself. It was what it meant. It meant that America could match us. And when we understood that, we knew it was over. Cologne Cathedral, March 6, 1945. It lasted less than 5 minutes. A Panther burned, another German tank silenced, and a new American machine stood victorious in the square. Cameraman Jim Bates captured all, the smoke, the fire, the moment when certainty ended. To Feldwebel Karl Hoffmann and Oberleutnant Wilhelm Bartelborth, it was just another duel. To history, it was the day the myth of German invincibility died on film. The turning point. The Pershing did not win the war. It did not roll across Europe in great numbers. It did not replace the Sherman as the backbone of Allied armor before victory came. But it did something subtler, and perhaps more powerful. It shattered a belief. For 3 years, German tankers had fought with the faith that their machines made them superior. Even when outnumbered, even when retreating, they trusted in thick steel and long 88s. On that March afternoon, staring down the barrel of a 90mm gun they had never seen before, that faith faltered. Beyond steel and numbers. In purely technical terms, the M26 Pershing was not a wonder weapon. It broke down. It had thinner armor than the King Tiger. Its gun was powerful but not flawless. Yet none of that mattered, because warfare is not only fought with steel and statistics. It is fought with minds, what soldiers believe about themselves and about their enemies. And in those final weeks, German crews no longer believed. The collapse. From Dessau to the Rhine, from bridgeheads to backroads, the pattern repeated. Tanks abandoned with fuel still in their tanks. Crews surrendering before their infantry. Entire battalions withdrawing at the rumor of Pershings in the area. Only 20 Pershings saw combat, but their psychological shadow stretched across the entire front. The end of the hunters. For German veterans, the memory endured. They spoke of it for decades. Before we were the hunters. After we were the hunted. The Pershing was more than a tank. It was proof. Proof that American industry, American democracy, could produce weapons equal to anything totalitarian Germany had created, while producing them in numbers Germany could never hope to match. Legacy. Today, Pershings stand silent in museums. One rests at Fort Knox, beside a captured King Tiger. Visitors see 2 steel giants, roughly comparable in design. The plaques list calibers, armor thickness, engine power. But what those plaques cannot capture is the psychological revolution that occurred in 1945. The King Tiger symbolized power and fear. The Pershings symbolized the moment that fear was broken. Epilogue, the long gun. The German tankers never knew the Pershing had a 90mm gun until they faced it. When it spoke at Cologne, it ended an era. The hunters became the hunted. The invincible felt vulnerable. And in that knowledge, in that shattering of certainty, lay the true victory of the Pershing. Not measured in destroyed tanks, but in destroyed belief. Not in numbers, but in spirit. The long gun they glimpsed through their periscopes was more than a weapon. It was the end of their war.